Hollywood, a place where dreams are made. But behind the glittering red carpets and Oscar speeches, a dark secret was festering. For decades, Harvey Weinstein, one of the most powerful film producers in the world, allegedly used his influence to exploit, harass, and assault women. In 2017, his empire collapsed, and his name became synonymous with abuse, betrayal, and the birth of the #MeToo movement. This is the story of how the most feared man in Hollywood became one of the most disgraced. In Hollywood, power doesn't always look like movie stars on red carpets. Sometimes, it looks like the man standing behind them, the one who decides which films get made, who gets cast, and whose career will never see the light of day. For decades, that man was Harvey Weinstein. Along with his brother Bob, he co-founded Miramax, the studio that brought the world Pulp Fiction, Shakespeare in Love, Good Will Hunting, and dozens of other award-winning films. Later, he ran the Weinstein Company, producing blockbusters and Oscar favorites. If you were an actor, a director, or a screenwriter, Harvey Weinstein could change your life with a single phone call. But that kind of power came with fear. Weinstein wasn't just known as a brilliant producer, he was infamous for his temper. Former employees described shouting fits, slammed doors, and an atmosphere where people walked on eggshells. His reputation for being ruthless wasn't a secret. In fact, it became part of his myth. If you crossed him, he could blacklist you from the industry. Behind that public persona, however, was something even darker. Many in Hollywood whispered about his private meetings with young actresses and assistants. Rumors circulated at parties and behind closed doors, stories of hotel suites, late-night casting sessions, and encounters that didn't feel professional. But no one dared to challenge him. Why? Because Harvey Weinstein wasn't just a producer, he was a gatekeeper. Speaking out meant risking everything. Careers could vanish overnight, and he had the lawyers, the connections, and the money to silence anyone who got too close. Some journalists did try. There were early reports, small investigations, even police complaints. But time and time again, they seemed to disappear. Settlements were quietly arranged. Non-disclosure agreements were signed. Victims who wanted to fight back found themselves isolated, intimidated, or buried under legal threats. The result? A man who operated above consequence. To the world, he was the kingmaker of Hollywood, a mogul with the golden touch. But to the women trapped in his orbit, he was something else entirely, a predator shielded by power, protected by silence, and enabled by an industry that chose not to ask questions. For decades, Harvey Weinstein moved in the spotlight, accepting awards, shaking hands with politicians, appearing in photographs with the world's most famous stars. All the while, the darkness stayed hidden, the system kept him untouchable, and Hollywood kept applauding. For years, the rumors about Harvey Weinstein felt like background noise in Hollywood. People joked about it at award shows, whispered about it at parties, but no one ever said anything publicly. The fear of retaliation was too great. But in 2017, everything changed. Two journalists at the New York Times, Jodi Kantor and Megan Toy, began digging deeper into the whispers. At the same time, Ronan Farrow at The New Yorker was pursuing his own investigation. What they uncovered was bigger than anyone expected. Piece by piece, a pattern emerged. Former assistants described being pressured into scheduling late-night hotel meetings. Actresses recounted being invited to private dinners that turned into something very different once the doors closed. Lawyers and former employees admitted there had been settlements, money paid in exchange for silence, with non-disclosure agreements locking the truth away. The journalists faced enormous pressure. Weinstein was known for crushing stories before they could ever be published. He used his wealth to hire top law firms, private investigators, even former intelligence officers. Some women who had tried to speak out before said they had been followed, intimidated, or threatened. Still, survivors were beginning to feel that the tide was turning. Among the first to break the silence was actress Ashley Judd, who described being lured to a hotel room and pressured into sexual advances. Then came Rose McGowan, who had long hinted at being assaulted by a powerful Hollywood figure. Their courage cracked the dam wide open. Once the articles hit the press in October 2017, the reaction was immediate and explosive. Headlines across the world named Weinstein not as a kingmaker, but as a predator. And suddenly, more women stepped forward. Gwyneth Paltrow, Angelina Jolie, Myra Sorvino. Dozens of women who had once remained silent now spoke with shocking detail. Their stories were disturbingly similar. Hotel rooms, locked doors, assistants dismissed before the meeting began, and coercion that left the women humiliated, terrified, and silenced. Many described how they had been told their careers would end if they refused, and how Weinstein's shadow haunted them long after. But this wasn't just about one man. As the stories spread, women around the world began sharing their own experiences. On social media, the phrase Me Too, first coined by activist Tarana Burke years earlier, surged into a global movement. Millions of survivors used the hashtag to reveal that Weinstein's alleged behavior was not rare, it was part of a much larger culture of abuse and silence. For Harvey Weinstein, the whispers had finally become voices, loud, undeniable, and unstoppable. The Hollywood mogul who had once silenced victims with money, fear, and power was now facing something he couldn't control: the truth. And this time, the world was listening. By 2018, the pressure had reached a breaking point. Harvey Weinstein, once one of the most powerful men in Hollywood, was no longer untouchable. Multiple criminal investigations were underway, spanning Los Angeles, London, and New York. In May of that year, Weinstein walked into a New York police precinct. Cameras swarmed as the once mighty producer was led out in handcuffs. The man who had ruled red carpets for decades now stood pale, hunched, and disgraced. That single image, Harvey Weinstein in cuffs, sent shockwaves across the world. But arrest was only the beginning. The real battle would play out in court. Prosecutors focused on two key survivors: Miriam Haley, a former production assistant, and Jessica Mon, an aspiring actress. Both testified in detail about how Weinstein manipulated and coerced them, describing encounters that left them broken and terrified. Miriam recounted being cornered in Weinstein's apartment in 2006, forced into an assault she couldn't stop. Jessica described how, over time, Weinstein wore her down, blurring the line between intimidation and manipulation until she felt powerless to resist. The defense had its own strategy. Weinstein's lawyers argued that these encounters were consensual. They pointed to friendly emails and text messages sent after the incidents, framing them as evidence of ongoing relationships. To them, this was not coercion, it was choice. But prosecutors countered. This was the very essence of power imbalance. They reminded the jury that Weinstein controlled careers, that his approval meant opportunity and his rejection meant exile. They argued that the so-called consent was nothing more than survival, women doing whatever they had to in order to escape his grasp, without destroying their futures. The courtroom was tense, filled with reporters, survivors, and advocates. The world watched closely, knowing this trial was bigger than one man. It was a test of whether the justice system could hold a powerful predator accountable. One by one, additional women took the stand, not as part of the formal charges, but as supporting witnesses. Their stories echoed the same chilling pattern: private meetings, sudden assaults, threats disguised as advice. Each testimony reinforced the prosecution's argument that this wasn't a misunderstanding, but a pattern of abuse stretching back decades. As the trial dragged on, Weinstein's health seemed to decline. He arrived in court using a walker, sparking accusations that it was a calculated attempt to gain sympathy. But the spectacle couldn't distract from the weight of the testimony. For the first time, Harvey Weinstein was not in control of the script. The women he had silenced were speaking, and the world was hearing them. The outcome now rested in the hands of the jury. February 24, 2020. After weeks of emotional testimony, cross-examinations, and heated arguments, the jury returned with a decision that would echo across the world. Harvey Weinstein was found guilty of rape in the third degree and criminal sexual assault. He was acquitted on the most serious charges of predatory sexual assault, but the conviction was still monumental. For the first time, one of the most powerful men in Hollywood, a man protected by wealth, lawyers, and silence for decades, had been brought down in a court of law. Weinstein was later sentenced to 23 years in prison. For a man in his late 60s with declining health, it was effectively a life sentence. The sight of him being wheeled into court, pale and frail, stood in stark contrast to the towering figure who once dominated the movie industry. But this story was never just about Harvey Weinstein. It was about the women who found the courage to speak. Miriam Haley, Jessica Mon, and countless others who risked their reputations, careers, and safety to expose a predator. Their voices, once silenced, now carried the weight of justice. The verdict also marked a turning point far beyond one courtroom. The case ignited the global #MeToo movement, originally coined by activist Tarana Burke years earlier. What began as a hashtag became a cultural reckoning. Survivors of harassment and assault across industries, from media to politics, from sports to corporations, found the courage to come forward. Weinstein's fall forced institutions to confront uncomfortable truths. Why had so many people looked the other way? How many assistants, lawyers, agents, and executives had enabled his behavior by staying silent? The scandal exposed not just an individual's crimes, but a system built on complicity. Even after his conviction, more charges awaited him in Los Angeles, where additional survivors accused him of similar crimes. For them, the New York verdict wasn't closure, it was only the beginning. The legacy of the Weinstein case remains complicated. Hollywood has introduced new rules, movements have pushed for accountability, but questions linger. How many other men like Weinstein operated in silence? How many still do? For survivors, the case offered a message, imperfect but powerful, that even the most powerful can fall, that when silence is broken, justice, however delayed, is possible. Harvey Weinstein's name will never again be spoken alongside Oscars and red carpets. Instead, it will forever be tied to betrayal, abuse, and a movement that changed the world. And the women who spoke out ensured that, this time, the story would not end in silence. The Harvey Weinstein case was more than the fall of a Hollywood mogul. It was the moment the world was forced to listen to survivors, and a reminder that silence only protects the abuser. If this story moved you, don't let it fade. Hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe with the bell on, so you never miss the next case we uncover. Because every story deserves to be heard, and some stories demand justice.